Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer. Liam, what's up, bro?
Not too much, brother. Today we're going to be chatting about WEF partners working towards a cashless society, citing pandemic as an accelerator. The Liberal Party fracturing with no clear party leader to replace Trudeau. Anti-Israel protests reaching new levels of violence around the world. The UK government saying to big tech that they must change their algorithms or face severe penalties. Also, BC healthcare and education declining significantly despite record high spending, and AstraZeneca withdrawing their COVID vaccine globally. However, if before we get into things, you wouldn't mind leaving us a kind review on Spotify or subscribing to our YouTube channel, that would be greatly appreciated. All right, let's get started. So first off, we've got the WEF partners working towards a cashless society and citing the pandemic as an accelerator. At a recent digital currency forum organized by the World Economic Forum, partners and financial leaders discussed the growing trend towards central bank digital currencies and a cashless society, mentioning that COVID-19 sped up this transition. The forum, titled Open Forum, the Digital Currencies Opportunity in the Middle East, featured Khalid Houmadane, governor of the Central Bank of Bahrain, who talked about how quickly the Middle East is adopting digital financial services and predicted that cash would soon be entirely phased out. In Canada, Pierre Poilievre, leader of the Federal Conservative Party, opposes the WEF's influence and has vowed to ban ministers from participating in its activities if he becomes Prime Minister, as well as Alberta Premier Danielle Smith also supporting distancing herself from the WEF's influence on Canadian policies and laws. So is a cashless society inevitable, or is there still a way to ensure that citizens have access to financial freedom?
I think long-term it's inevitable. I don't think there's anything we can really do about it. I think right now it's sort of this power struggle between, will the Liberals enforce it? Yes. Will the Conservatives? Maybe not. Pierre says things like, we won't support the WEF or the CBDC program, but Liberals will be in power again before long. And if there really is this sort of global force working together, I think it's only a matter of time. But, like a lot of things, CBDCs in a cashless society will be marketed today as a convenience and used tomorrow for control. It's like a lot of things they do these days, right? And, our government's already proven that they are willing to weaponize the banking system by freezing many of them just for pushing back against the mandates, right? So I think we can say with confidence, we don't want to make it any easier for them to continue with the same actions in the future. But interesting, something you actually mentioned, beyond the potential for malice, there's also this inevitable issue of tech malfunctions. For instance, 2 years ago, the Rogers network suffered a nationwide blackout. So that wasn't just, internet and phone, it was also banking and merchant services. So myself, we suffered like multiple thousands of dollars in loss of revenue just in that one day, right? So you see how these things can happen, and maybe no fault of anybody is in terms of it being intentional or on purpose, but it can happen. Then what? Everyone's just frozen, I guess. But also, we're seeing a significant rise in cyber attacks. So I know the World Economic Forum talks about them, but the reality is they're infiltrating things like hospitals, schools. They haven't got to banks yet, but they've taken down major casinos. If they continue on that warpath, what's really going to stop them, right? But the reality is, look, if this technology is just created for people to use because they want to, that's not a big issue. The problem is potential future where we don't have a choice.
And then too, it goes outside of just national levels. Like we also saw as soon as the Russian invasion of Ukraine happened, they barred Russia from the SWIFT international payments, right? So that then you can also have the effect of debanking entire nations essentially. Then also, even to the ability that CBDCs would allow for product tracking. So we saw back in 2022, I believe it was, major payment processors like Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, all this, they were talking about putting together a national registry for gun owners, everybody that was purchasing guns, because there was some sort of legality issue in the government being able to do that. And so they just said, the private sector was just like, okay, we'll do it. Like we can create this. If any transactions happen at XYZ location, we can just put those people on a list. So there's also the inevitable factor of tracking anything and everything you spend your money on. And then also too, like, you mentioned with Trudeau in with the truckers protest freezing bank accounts, but then even remember like PayPal a couple years ago too was saying like, oh, we'll fine people $2,500 if they're guilty of spreading misinformation
about COVID. That was so wild. What a bag of lunatics.
And yeah, so yes, Visa, MasterCard, and American Express, PayPal, they all walked back these policies and these implementations that they were going to aim to do, but you can at least see where their head is at with these kind of things, and then you look at what this technology will allow them to do with those, and it just goes, oh Jesus.
Yeah. So you know what's interesting? Like, you make a really good point. They've already shown us what they'll do, right? So I think people, it's just that caveat emptor, buyer beware. Don't get into this. But what's interesting is I think this will actually sort of fracture society in a sense where people are going to go back to either using some other form of currency, people will hoard cash and continue using it within their own communities, or they'll go back to a barter system. There's a growing number of people that don't agree with a lot of the things the government's doing, right? Especially because of things like this. And then you get into those situations, and all it takes is one situation. You're going to have a large group of people, let's call it 10% of the population, say like 4 million people in Canada that are going to be like, hey, we're not going to contribute to this. We're not playing this game. We're going to have our own little communities. We're going to barter. One instance, 30% of people are going to do it. As soon as they lock them up for any particular reason, you're going to lose a much larger group of people, right? So it's kind of funny, like, if society works together on this and they stand up and push back, and not necessarily just against the government, but push back enough to create their own system on the side, which I think they will, we take a lot of power away from the government. That will be a really interesting thing to see over time, if they do implement something like this and it is not optional. So yeah, I mean, I don't know where it lands, but it's something I would definitely keep an eye on. And truth be told, like, I will be one of those people leading the charge if I'm still in this country when that happens.
And looking back at even, say, instances like the Chinese Communist Party back in the 1950s and 60s when they were first taking hold of China, parallel economies popped up like crazy because obviously in a communist state, the government decides both inputs and outputs for their economy, what to produce, what to sell, who gets to keep what, et cetera, and very much underground economies popped up, and even just like underground factories, all this kind of stuff, misreporting. They wouldn't tell the government what they made so that they could then barter it on the side or whatever. Mm-hmm. So these things definitely happen. I think the scary factor with these kind of technologies, though, is they are so much more pervasive, and it's harder to escape the watchful eye, or essentially the eye of Sauron as from Lord of the Rings. If you look at that as like the government, it's a lot harder to escape their view in the modern world with tracking and all of this kind of stuff. But
I think the thing is, I don't think it's about avoiding them. I think it's about just having a parallel economy and saying fuck you.
Yeah,
because you don't have to play their game. You don't have to use these systems. If you want to go trade, something, if you chop down a tree and you want to trade your wood to someone who can give you half a cow, the government is not really going to, like, what are they going to do here?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? How are they going to tax that system? What are they going to start arresting people for that? You'll have anarchy. You'll have a revolution if they start doing stuff like that.
Well, governments have done that before, so.
I know, look what happened eventually, right? It gets really bad, then you have revolution.
All right, moving on here to our second story of the day. We've got the Liberal Party fracturing with no clear party leader to replace Trudeau. According to a recent survey by Abacus Data, 54% of respondents were unsure about the best candidate to replace Justin Trudeau. Among those with a preference, Chrystia Freeland was the leading choice at 13%, followed closely by former Bank of Canada Governor Mark Carney at 11%. Other potential candidates like Melanie Joy, Francois Champagne, Dominic LeBlanc, Sean Fraser, and Anita Anand received between 3 and 5% support each. Despite Ms. Freeland and Mr. Carney having higher name recognition, the poll indicates that there's no clear frontrunner for the next Liberal Party leader, which lacks a party focus, but more significantly, a lack of direction. So, what is the future for the Liberal Party?
It's interesting. There's always ebbs and flows to these things, and I'll kind of explain why this is maybe exactly where the Conservatives were, over the last 5 years. So this basically tells me that Liberal voters have no confidence in their own party's leadership at this point, right? And what I mean by there's ebbs and flows and the Conservative Party was in the same situation is prior to Poilievre, since Harper, we had two guys that were leaders. We had Andrew Scheer, who's honestly best described as a wiener. Like, he's just, sorry, dude. And Aaron O'Toole. Now, O'Toole's got a military background, but for a guy with a military background, he was absolutely spineless. Neither were strong political leaders. And O'Toole's behavior actually through the election interference was despicable. I mean, he said that he knew that there was interference, but he was afraid of being vilified by the Liberals, so he kept his mouth shut. What the fuck, dude? So look, what I'm saying is it happens. You know what I mean? And when it does, we also know where these parties finish, and it's second place at best. So I think it's just sort of indicative of where that party is these days. I think all that does, it just sort of confirms the assumption that they're second, maybe third in the next election, right? Because both of those, like, I don't know enough about Carney, but Chrystia Freeland, she's a dangerous human being. She really, really is. And she's highly unqualified for the things she's doing. And she's ruining this country and smiling about it, which is wild. So I don't know. It's where do they land? I think they're going to go through 4 years of struggle, 4 or 5 years of struggle after this next election. But you know what? It's the Liberal Party. They'll find their footing again, just like the Conservatives did.
I think this is the natural occurrence of what happens when a party has to rely solely on slandering the opposition, and you know that's been their game for the last 5 to 10 years, has been this identity politics of going, we're going to just create a diverse and inclusive country, and look at us, it's all sunshine and rainbows, literally. And then the Conservatives are big and evil. But there was never like, how often did you hear Liberals really saying, like, here's our plan for the economy? Like, I mean, Trudeau was always
excuse me if I don't think about the economy.
Yeah, exactly.
What?
Yeah. So
you are the CEO of the country, which is a business, and you're not worried about the economics?
Yeah,
dude.
And so we know, right, that people will only care about those causes, these diversity and inclusive causes, or say things like climate change, as long as they're able to put food on the table. But as soon as their wallets start getting tight, everybody stops caring about these things very quickly. But that's where the Liberals have put all of their eggs in that basket for the last decade, and now they're sitting here going, I don't have an answer for any of these problems that you guys are now prioritizing as your number one.
Right.
And I think that's the same thing that, like you were talking about, that's very similar to what the Conservatives did, where they didn't really have a platform. They didn't really have a hard stance on, like, this is what we stand for. Nope. It was just, okay, we're the opposite of these guys.
Yep. No, I agree. And you know, it's a good point. The Liberals have no strong policy right now, or nothing that you can really stand behind. And because of that, who would possibly want to be the leader? So think about it. Like, it's already... No one really wants to get into politics unless you're a fucking lunatic anyway. So when you think about trying to be the leader of the Liberal Party right now, all you're doing is falling on a sword, because they're going to get dominated on the next election. So either you are the fall guy or girl, or Trudeau's the fall guy. Which is it? Because no matter what, it's not going to end well. So who would sign up for that? Like, you'd have to pay me knowing that all I'm going to do is fall flat on my face because you can't make a difference. Your policies are a fucking disaster, and your own party doesn't know who should be leading the way. So yeah, it's interesting. It's not only perhaps that the party has no direction and the voters have no confidence. It's that nobody in the party actually wants to lead, because it's a sinking ship, right?
Yeah. It is crazy to think that there is somebody scarier than Trudeau with Freeland as well.
Right.
And I think she's even said that she would be interested in running if Trudeau steps away.
Yo, she did.
Yeah. Okay.
No, there's a reason that she was voted. She got 13% of the vote.
Like, if anybody needs any idea as to how just terrible this person is, go look at the smirk and the happiness, the literal joy in her face as she's talking about freezing the protesters' bank accounts from the Freedom Convoy. Like, it wasn't like she was sitting there going, we understand this is a very complex situation, and we didn't take this decision lightly, but we think it's our only path forward. It's like, as the reporter was asking her, she's like sitting there, like, doing her Coke smile. And
I think it's 5 hands, but all right, cool. Let's go with Coke.
Yeah. But either way, like, that just being able to sit there and be like prideful and happy of the fact that you're freezing everyday Canadians' bank accounts, when at that time we knew too, like, yeah, sure, they had reasons they were putting forward to say, hey, this is why we're doing it, but we also know that all of those instances were either extremely dramatized or just completely fabricated,
even sensationalized. None of them were valid. None of them were valid enough for their actions. Not even one.
Yeah.
So yeah, the woman's insane.
Yeah, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. Do you think Trudeau's even going to run in the next election?
No, he still says he is. So I'm not even actually sure why this popped up, because Trudeau's been pretty staunch about the fact that I'm here, I'm sticking around. There's still lots to do. Dude, you've already burned the entire country to the ground. There's nothing left.
Yeah.
There's nothing to do, man.
Yeah.
So I don't know, but when this kind of stuff happens, sometimes, well, I'm of the mind that you see the leaders of the country, but I feel like there's always a layer behind them that you don't get to see. People that are sort of maybe pulling strings or operating behind the curtain a little bit. Perhaps they're the ones that probably do have their hands in ownership in the media and stuff like that. So perhaps these are things that they do to sort of test the market to see what people are thinking. Like, hey, none of us really want Trudeau here, and the people behind the scenes may be feeling the same way. But is there a strong leader that the people want? So they could have just been doing this as like as a litmus test to see what liberal voters were thinking. And it looks like they're thinking they don't like any of them. So maybe they won't really do anything. Maybe they'll just let him fall on his face. I don't know. But as far as I know, Trudeau has no intention of stepping down.
Yeah. I don't think his ego will let him. All right, next story for the day. We've got anti-Israel protests reaching new levels of violence around the world. In recent events, violent rhetoric and, in some instances, physical violence have surged at anti-Israel protests. At George Washington University, student protesters aligning themselves with pro-Hamas ideology shockingly called for the beheading of the school's president and trustees. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic at the University of Amsterdam, Jewish students faced a harrowing attack by anti-Israel activists armed with sticks. A third event kicked off the other night in Athens, Greece, as an angry mob of anti-Israeli protesters went on the hunt for a group of Israeli tourists who were staying in a hotel. The crowd forcefully entered the hotel, prompting the arrival of riot police, who had to use tear gas at the scene. Adding more fuel to the fire was Independent Ontario MPP representing Hamilton, Sarah Jama, who issued an address at a pro-Palestine protest gathering at McMaster University. Taking the microphone from Hamilton's NDP MP Matthew Green, she yelled, "Globalize the Intifada." So are these protests, or are they aspiring revolutions?
Okay. So now I'm on the same page as you. You got me there.
3 episodes, but we're here.
Yeah, well, things are getting pretty wild. They're continuing to get pretty wild. So there's a couple things. So first, I'm at a little bit of a loss in understanding the mentality, and maybe it's just mob mentality, because I know it's not intelligence, of people attacking Jewish people, of anti-Israeli protesters attacking Jewish people that have nothing to do with the war. They don't even know their stance on the war. You know what I mean? A lot of people that are Jewish don't even support what's happening in Israel. But these people are just attacking them for being Jewish. That is so misplaced. And it frustrates me, because I just don't understand the mentality there. Are they going, well, people in Gaza are being bombed, so therefore you might be innocent, but you have to suffer. This tit for tat thing. I mean, look, these people aren't in a war zone. It's completely inappropriate. It really frustrates me, to be honest with you. I just don't understand where humans get that nasty side of them from. And it's a little hard for me. But anyway, one thing though that I will say is the government. So last time you and I were talking about the CUPE and OPSU, the unions that were supporting the encampments. So the government actually came out and stifled that pretty quick. So you and I were talking last time, and I was like, okay, are they going to let this go, or are they going to tell these guys to shut up? So they did tell them to shut up. So why that's significant is because now it goes back to protesters against the institutions. There's no lean of the institution on the side of the protesters, because that makes it a little muddy, right? Now, where is this going to go, and what's going to happen next? Honestly, I'm torn. I still think there's a chance that this cools off in the next 2 weeks in flatlines, based on how government and how intervention sort of slows this down, but also what happens in Israel. So they're kind of knocking on the doorstep of a ceasefire. It's gone back and forth, over the last, it's always been kind of ongoing. The last couple months, but over the last week, they seem pretty close. So if that happens, then at the end of the day, these protesters have nothing to scream about. In a sense, like, I understand they want people to divest from Jewish interests in business. That was why this started. 90% of these people don't give a shit about that. They don't care. That's not what they're there for, in my opinion, anyway. So if there is a ceasefire, there is some form of peace at a time, you have to the protests have to soften up, right? So there's that, but also because now it's gone back to institution against protester, they are up against a reasonable force, right? So this still may curb before it gets like out of control. Like, I don't know if it will escalate beyond the schools into sort of more centralized, like local. I don't know if it's going to happen anymore.
Well, I remember saying, I think even when October 7th first happened, within a couple weeks there, I was very much on the idea that, like, going, okay, what's Hamas's play here? I remember thinking back then, I think the whole goal was to goad Israel into a hefty response so that they could then essentially radicalize all the Western Muslim communities into destabilizing the West. Because I think these organizations like Hamas and such, I don't think they even believe that they can put up a fight on the world stage against any of these actors. So their only way is essentially psychological warfare
Basically
and
being the
guerrilla
martyr.
warfare. Yeah. And I mean, that's how radical Islam has operated for decades, if not centuries. And so I think that's been the long play this entire time. I don't think these protests have grown out of, like, I don't think they've just naturally become more radicalized and violent. I think this was the play the entire time. And, you know, I think it's important to point out as well, there is so much that you can criticize Israel for, but it's also extremely important to look at it and go, okay, who has a vested interest in me taking these hard stances in these conflicts? Because again, it doesn't make sense. I get that a lot of people get into it for the social reasons, and it's like, well, my friends care deeply about this topic, so I care deeply about this topic. And again, all civilian life lost in wars is 100% tragic. Except it's very interesting as to where that attention goes, because you look around the Middle East, hundreds of thousands of civilians have died in wars there for over the last few decades, whether it be the Syrian civil war, whether it be the Yemenis civil war. Then, I mean, even look at what America did over the last couple decades. It's like, where was this outrage? But so to me, it does seem very interesting that, okay, well, as soon as Israel got involved, then all of a sudden it's a topic that everybody cares about very deeply. And again, that's why I think that was the entire intention from the beginning. And you were talking about how you're unsure of how that understandable rage over this situation then gets pointed towards any and every single Jewish person. But I think it's very important to realize that in this conflict, this is a holy war. Like, this is over the holy lands. Like, it's about who has rightful ownership over Judea, essentially.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
You know, people will say, well, history didn't start on October 7th. And I'd also say history didn't start in 1948. And so this war has been going on between these two religions for centuries, and the wars over this holy land have been going on for thousands of years.
Right.
So
right.
It's like there's so much baggage in this.
I get that, but you know, the thing is, I've seen video footage of white kids attacking Jewish students. They're not Muslim. They're not religious. Well, they might be religious, but this is not the religion they partake in.
Are you sure they're not? Because have you seen how many kids are converting to Islam on these campuses right now?
That's okay, but even if they do, and then you immediately become radicalized by the idea, you have no roots in the religion. So you're basically just wearing someone else's hat so you go beat that person. Yeah. That's totally fucked up.
Yeah.
I'm not for it. I don't like it. It bothers me. I understand where you're coming from. I totally do. And like you said, I agree too. There's a lot of things that Israel has done wrong in this, and I'm not saying that they're right here. What I'm saying though is we should stop attacking Jewish people in other countries, students that are trying to enter for no reason.
Oh yeah.
You know, like blowing the doors into a hotel so we can. What were you going to do? Were you going to kill the whole family? Yeah. Is that the intention? What was your plan, guys? And the problem is with mob mentality, you get enough of these people, and it's like no one knows when to stop. They don't know where the limit is. One punch becomes 10, becomes a boot to the head, becomes a weapon, becomes now you got dead people. Like, hey, man, like it spirals pretty quick, and it is a little concerning. Anyway, look, it's a little off topic because I don't think that's necessarily where a lot of the protesting is rooted in or coming from. But yeah, I guess to your point, like, what's this? Where does this go, and what does this look like? If the intention of Hamas was originally to become the martyr, and then to watch this spill over into sort of this global protest and sort of fracturing the West, they've done a good job. Fair enough, right? But how much further can they take it? When does this stop?
It's scary to realize that these two very radical ideologies are starting to intermingle with. You know, I've pointed out how these protests are definitely infected with Marxism. A lot of the campus protesters they'll outright say they are Marxists, the organizers. I've played clips before. I've also made videos on our Instagram page showing some of the speeches that are happening here, and they are very much communist actors. And so this whole like union between Islam and Marxism is very interesting. I was actually talking to a buddy this morning about it, and he made a very good point. He's like, because these two ideologies shouldn't exist. Communists always attack all religions, and Islam thinks that any non-believers should be killed. So it doesn't make sense that these two would be unified. But both of these ideologies very much want to. It's what we were talking about last week. Enemy of my enemy is my friend, right?
Yeah.
And the enemy is the Western world, Western civilization. But what's really interesting is the Marxists have always been very good at deception and PR and creating these like oppressor versus oppressed narratives. So they're essentially the propagandists, and the Islamicists are becoming like the muscle. And it's like this very weird.
Interesting.
It's this very weird, because I mean, for the longest time, Islam hasn't been exactly had the greatest reputation on the world stage per se.
Yeah.
And then you've got this like intermingling of these two people that now are like wielding their strength together.
So kind of like the whoever's leading the Marxist agenda on top, they're basically the generals in these wars, and whether they're mobilizing the BLM group or whether they're mobilizing Islam, they just basically go like, which is the group that's got the most cultural power right now that we can use as the oppressed, and let's weaponize those people to forward this agenda. That's very interesting.
Yeah. So and that's what I've been. I don't know whether it's hard to get these thoughts out sometimes, but I think that's been the entire play. All of these things, all of these movements, whether it be BLM, whether it be the Palestine riots, it's just what can we use in this moment to undermine the Western world? Whatever
it's just whichever weapon kind of, it just boils to the top. Whatever's the most available and can cause the most damage, you pick that one up and you wield it.
Yeah,
interesting.
100%.
Yeah.
It's like that. It's like that thought out of 1984 where he said the rage that one felt was abstract, yet it could be switched from one object to another, like the flame of a blow lamp. And it's like that's 100% what's happening here for sure.
Wild.
All right, moving on to our next story. We've got the UK government saying to big tech that they need to change their algorithms or face severe penalties. So the UK's Office of Communication, or Ofcom, has warned online platforms about incoming fines and penalties if they don't change their algorithms that suggest harmful content to children. According to Technology Secretary Michelle Donnellan, platforms should implement age checks similar to real-world verification methods and address algorithms that expose children to harmful content online. Ofcom suggests age verification methods like checking a user's age through their bank records, photo ID matching, facial age estimation, and credit card checks. Ofcom plans to finalize and publish the Children's Safety Codes of Practice within a year, with platforms given 3 months to assess their risks to children based on the guidelines provided. So are these necessary measures, or do they open the door to a complete erasure of online privacy?
Well, so it's interesting. This is one section of the Online Safety Act. So, I'll focus on this first. I think it's pretty clear that children are susceptible to online harm, right? At that age, they don't really have the mental faculties. They don't really have the emotional awareness to sort of manage these situations. And they're incredibly vulnerable to peer pressure at that age, right? And while I know we want to put it on the parents, and I think a lot of it is on the parents, they can't be there all the time dealing with everything. And they can't keep teenagers off social media. They're going to find a way, right? So, in saying that, I think it's perfectly reasonable that social media companies change their algorithms to avoid at least exposure to content promoting self-harm, which is what these kids are facing. They said within 1 month, kids are seeing content that are promoting suicide or self-harm. That's mental. Like that, of course, that needs to change, right? So I think they can definitely do their part here to improve the situation. And truth be told, this is actually a much better solution than banning whatever speech is just arbitrarily deemed hate speech, which our Trudeau government is trying to do, right? However, back to the other point, the Children's Safety Initiative is just part of UK's Online Safety Act, and I'm of the opinion it's one of the most egregious free speech suppressing legislations in the Western world. So this bill grants extensive powers to Ofcom, allowing them to censor online speech and potentially imprison individuals for publishing content deemed offensive, regardless of the actual harm caused, which is pretty wild. It also allows for broad interpretations of hate speech and a subjective approach to each matter, which definitely sounds familiar to us here in Canada, right? This bill also has a provision regarding encrypted messaging, which is insane. So They have insisted that tech platforms use government-approved technology to scan private messages for illegal content. So this completely compromises anything that's encrypted. Doesn't matter what the platform is, which is insane. It basically means there's zero privacy anymore, right? Now, overall, like I said, this specific children's safety measure will probably do more good than harm, so it's hard not to support it. That being said, I'm weary of any group that is on a warpath to eliminate free speech.
Yeah, I think for sure social media is extremely dangerous for young kids, especially even just take the self-harm stuff out of it, essentially the weaponization of status. I think it was the Coddling of the American Mind by Jonathan Haidt really talks about this topic really well, about how both the social media landscape is making things harder for teens, especially girls too, because for instance, if one thing that he was pointing out was fear of being left out. Like most people feel like there's that constant phrase FOMO, fear of missing out, but how in young women especially it induces fear of being left out because they see their friends at a group or they post a picture with somebody else and then they immediately think, well, why wasn't I invited? They must not have wanted me there, because you're seeing social interactions without you present. But one of the things that he also talks about in that book is how this whole obsession with safety is actually just making kids more and more vulnerable to anxiety and depression and all of this kind of stuff, because they're not used to having to face hardships in life. I think even Jordan Peterson's pointed this out before. It's like, it's easy to think and sit there and go, okay, well, I'm going to I'm going to look out for my children by solving all of their problems for them. But then what you do is you end up raising a child that is incapable of fixing their own problems. And so to me, it's like this very double-edged sword. I very much support that idea that kids shouldn't be on social media. I think, again, I do think that that burden primarily falls on parents to keep phones out of their children's hands, though. And then there's the other aspect as well that I think it's also important. Like, these are very tough and disturbing conversations to have, but hey, maybe you should have a conversation about suicide and depression with your young child and actually really pay attention. I think, I've been there before. I've been in very dark holes in the past before. And yeah, I can say that some people in my life were not helpful in those aspects. Like, I opened up, I talked about it to a couple people, and then it was kind of like, well, why are you feeling that way? And you're like, well, all right, I'll just go fuck myself then.
Cool. Where's the nearest bridge?
Yeah. So like, I get it. But to me, this is just like such a trap. There's so many issues at play here.
I agree, but I think there are certain things you can take off the table, right? So you want your kid to lose at baseball. You want your kid to get dirt rubbed in his face. You want your kid to get made fun of. All of those things. I want that to happen to all my kids, because it does harden you a little bit. It calluses you a little bit. It helps you just kind of understand that the world is not fair. The world is unfair. The world's not always going to be nice. The world doesn't care about your feelings. But I don't need them exposed to self-harm and suicide. You don't really need that. So it's kind of like, I want my kid to get pushed around and maybe get into a scuffle, but I don't want his head beat in with a baseball bat. So where's the line? And for me, I know that's a little extreme, but for me, when I look at what these social medias can do to keep that kind of content away from these kids, to me, that's the baseball bat. If a kid is within 1 month is seeing content that is basically promoting self-harm and suicide, I don't need them seeing that. To me, I think if there's a way to avoid that, let's do that. But again, you got to be able to draw the line somewhere. I know that, like, you and I live in this sort of free speech absolutist world, which I do. But when it comes to children, you have to provide a little more protection, right? If someone's going to wield a bat, I can manage myself. I'm okay, but I don't want my son there. I don't want him to have to deal with that, right? And it's the same with this situation. So for me, I think it's nuanced. And I think when it comes to this kind of stuff, I do think there's more we can do just to protect children, like actually protect children. And look, you look at a lot of the bills that are coming through right now, whether it's the Online Safety Act, whether it's Bill C-63 in Canada, and you see them all over. It's the Digital Services Act in the UK, the European Union. They're all based in this idea of we're doing it to protect children. The foundation of that is strong. It's just what they're doing is nefarious and they're full of shit. That's the reality. But wanting to provide some protection for these kids, that makes sense. It's your job as a parent to protect your child, not to protect them from maybe getting dirt rubbed in their face or getting made fun of, but the big things that will really harm them. And this looks like it can have that effect. So for me, I'm for putting something in place to stop these kids from being exposed to it.
I think the way that I look at it is, let's imagine that social media is like cocaine and maybe the kids shouldn't be having it in the first place at all.
Right.
And then we're discussing about that cocaine being laced with harmful substances like fentanyl. If you look at that as like the self-harming posts,
Sure
it's like
is.
the fentanyl
Yeah.
that's being mixed into the cocaine.
Yeah.
But like the conversation needs to be having about not having people on these substances altogether. Like even me, I've radically cut down my social media use over the last
Sure.
little bit. I maybe use it for 20 to 30 minutes a day.
I agree with your analogy, but my analogy would kind of go like this. A little different is that social media is actually more like food. Social media can be quite valuable for people. It can help them get a long way. You can make good money. You can build a business on it.
Cocaine can be pretty fucking fun too.
But to me, it's a lot of this self-harm stuff would be, well, that's like you're pumping kids full of sugar.
Yeah.
And I couldn't think of a better analogy because I think it's actually in between hours. I think it's between food and cocaine.
All right. The next story we've got, despite record spending, healthcare and education has declined significantly in BC. So British Columbia puts more money into healthcare and education than any other areas, but recent data from a Fraser Institute study shows that performance in both of these sectors has actually declined. Despite heavy spending, the study shows that simply increasing funds hasn't improved outcomes in healthcare or education. British Columbia's lavish spending has even led to credit rating downgrades, highlighting the need for reforms rather than solely relying on increased taxation. So, what is the best path forward for Canada's most expensive government institutions, such as healthcare and education?
It's actually a tough question, because the only thing these governments seem to know how to do is throw more money into things, and they've actually become so big that I don't know if they can fall. But I mean, if you needed another example of poor government spending, they took more of your taxpayer dollars and things got worse. So you got to ask yourself, what did they do with the money? If you increase spending by that much and things got worse, so that means actually less money went to productivity, so where did the money go? That's what I just don't understand. You know what I mean? Politicians continue to increase spending across all government sectors at every level of government, yet all aspects of our lives seem to be getting worse constantly. In fact, the only thing that our government seems to do effectively is build the public service, which has grown significantly since Trudeau got into power. It's at this point now where obviously we're getting crushed not only economically by their decisions, but also by inefficient bureaucracy. So I don't really have a great solution here other than implement new leaders and cut the government size in half at least. But it's tough. I mean, look, anybody that argues for a bigger government, or at least not even reducing the size of government, you're either a part of the government or you're a complete idiot. I'm sorry, it just is what it is. This is so out of control.
There's a great saying, and I'm paraphrasing here, Millet from down in Argentina, but he said, I think he actually got this from Milton Friedman, but he said that when you spend your money on yourself, you penny pinch. When you spend somebody else's money on you, you do it frivolously. And I can't think of any worse method than spending somebody else's money on somebody else. And that to your point, where does this money go? It's like nobody has any emotional ties to that money. And so they'll waste it and they don't care. I think I've even noticed this before working with, say, on the content front and videography front. It's like if I work with a corporation and I know that the person I'm dealing with is just swiping a company credit card,
For sure.
they don't question a budget or a number that you throw at them ever. You could increase your prices by 50% and they'll just be like, yep, okay, cool. But you do that with a small business, somebody that is looking at their bottom line every single day and they see the money coming in and going out. They sit there and go, ooh, you know what? Actually, can we cut back on this expense? They're a little bit more even concerned about the final product, of the quality of the product. So yeah, I don't think there's any incentive for these people to care about where that money goes. And actually, I think too many people focus on the idea of reforming the public education system rather than creating a completely new and parallel education system. And I think that's what's needed.
I think that's where we're going.
Because even our current public school model, and this is, I'm going to try to not get in the weeds here, but our current public school model was built off the Prussian factory school method, which was designed to create either soldiers or factory workers.
Yeah.
And it was put in place in the late 1800s, and it was very much looked at as, okay, we can provide what amounts to essentially daycare to this generation of factory workers during the Industrial Revolution, and then we can train the next generation of people to be better factory workers.
Kind of made sense. If you actually think about it, it doesn't even seem that dark. It's kind of like, oh, this serves a reasonable purpose, and then it got dark.
Exactly. Well, there was, because actually in the Country School of Tomorrow, which was authored by Frederick Taylor Gates, and he was the right hand man of John D. Rockefeller, the biggest industrialist in America at that time, and yeah, he was very behind funding and promoting the public school system. This is probably like 95% verbatim, where Frederick Taylor Gates said, "In our dreams, we have limitless resources, and the people will yield themselves with perfect docility to our molding hands. We have not to raise up from among them authors, lawyers, or statesmen of whom we already have an ample supply. The goal we set before ourselves is a simple yet beautiful one, to train these people to a perfectly ideal life exactly where they are." And their whole goal was, yes, to create factory workers.
Right, worker bees. Yeah.
And also in that paper too, it can sound very conspiratorial, the excerpt that I just listed there, but he was essentially making the case that in a lot of these poverty-stricken areas of the southern states at the time, that they were living in abject poverty and like disease-ridden, and it was very bad, the conditions they were living in. So you can maybe give him a little bit of credit that he was just genuinely wanting to produce a better life for these people, but the goal was to train people, behavioral training, and to operate within these industrial systems. And so yes, we can make a great argument that those systems did provide benefit, and that public school system did provide benefit when the job opportunities that were available for people after leaving school was factory. But nowadays, you can't make a living working in factory. Like you're essentially being trained now as to how to be a good employee in an Amazon warehouse. Like that's not a career path like working in a factory. Like working in a factory in the early 1900s was enough for you to get a house, pay for your entire family's food and all of this kind of stuff. But now, like,
forget the early 1900s, like 1950s, 1960s. Dad, look, I'm not saying this is the best model, but dad could go to work, have 2 kids at home with mom, and have a car and everything paid for just on his salary. So it was a much better, like the economy was in a much better place for the middle class Americans and Canadians. That's gone 100%. Now, kind of back to the education and healthcare thing, I think you actually touched on something interesting. The best way to fix this is a parallel economy on both, to both, where it's, you sort of privatize education, which you're seeing a lot of, which happened through the pandemic. A lot more people are doing homeschooling, which is hard for people to maintain. So what they did is they started getting into groups. Now there's all these smaller schools that are private education, but they don't cost an arm and a leg to be a part of. It's not just for people that are in high society. So I think we're going to continue to see more and more of that. You see it a lot in the States too. I don't know if you know Tim Kennedy. He's a ex-Navy SEAL in the States. Absolute weapon of a human being. Love him. So he started a school called Apogee Cedar Park, where half the day, for these students, the kids, half the day is outside, half the day is inside. They learn STEM program stuff, basically stuff that's actually applicable. And then they're outside learning how to, it's all different stuff, but learning how to survive, learning how to grow food, learning how to, use these weapons, learning how to start a fire. There's a myriad of other things, but a lot of it is hands-on. And I think that that's a much better way for me. That's how I want to raise my kids. But what I'm kind of getting at here is there is a parallel educational economy that's already growing. And I think it's getting to this point that it's going to tip over and be a strong competitor to the public school system, probably in the next decade or so, right? Like my kids are not going to go to a public school. There's no chance. And then to take that same idea to healthcare, in Ontario, we're already kind of looking at a public-private system. I don't know how far they're going to go or where they're going to land with it because of how much control the federal government has over provinces and actually maybe privatizing some of this. But it is actually a good model. And I realize that not everybody can afford it. But why I'm saying it's a good model is, A, it will force the public healthcare system to improve. Because if the private's doing so much better, it will have to do better just to sort of compete or keep up or provide at least the same level of care. Because that's kind of ridiculous, especially because of the kind of money that's going to it. The other thing that'll actually happen, though, you will alleviate pressure on the medical system because the people that have the money to go to private healthcare are older. They're the boomers right now. They're the ones that actually need medical care. So if they have the money to go pay for private and they go to it, you'll actually alleviate some of the pressure in the public system, which I think is valuable. And then for me, like I'm always of the opinion that, look, I think private everything is better. I think get the government's hands out of it. What the hell are we doing here? So for me, I think both of those things would actually move the needle in the right direction for this country.
I think there should be massive tax breaks given to the people that are able to take themselves off of the government tit, essentially. So, hey, if you're able to actually put your kid through schooling, like according to something right here that I'm looking at, it costs roughly $10,600 to put a kid through state schooling for a year. Okay. If I can get my kid to pass the standardized tests for his age range and pass their reading tests and all that, give me a $10,000 tax break per year. Same thing when it comes to health and the healthcare system. If I can go do the, let's say, very much like military standardized training type of stuff, if I can get through the a physical test.
Give me an obstacle course, I'm good.
Give me an obstacle course or a physical test. If I can complete it and also show that, I'm in good physical condition. All right, give me 38% of my taxes back if I can show that I didn't need to use your healthcare system this year. I haven't gone to a hospital in years upon years upon years, or even a doctor. I haven't got a prescription. I don't take any medication for anything. Like, why is 38% of my taxes going to a system that I don't use?
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you, but there's no way they're ever going to let you do anything like that. They say, Liam, that's not how it works, okay? We're all going to contribute to the group. It's what's better for everybody. You're a Canadian. You can't live on your own. You need me, right? Okay, Trudeau.
Yeah, create the dependency and then market yourself as the savior. Yeah. All right, next story for the day. We've got AstraZeneca to withdraw its COVID-19 vaccine globally. So it has initiated a global withdrawal of its vaccine, citing a surplus of updated vaccines and decreased demand. This decision follows reports of side effects like blood clots and low blood platelet counts associated with the vaccine. So is this the beginning of the dominoes falling or an isolated incident?
I think this is AZ taking one on the chin. I don't think you're going to see them fall, right? So this may be coincidence because apparently they started this program in March of kind of stopping production, and it just went into effect on May 9th. What's interesting though is last week they admitted publicly in court that their vaccines were causing blood clots, they were contributing to deaths, and causing myocarditis. So when you say that in court, that itself may be the death sentence for your product, because you may now open yourself up to litigation, right? I don't care if they're vaccines. It seems that if you admit that they're hurting you, I think automatically there's got to be some accountability there. And even if not from a legal perspective, what does it do to the brand, right? So they said, hey, look, but people just aren't taking them anymore. There's been several million COVID vaccines administered in 2024 already. I looked at the data today. So there are still people taking them. And from what I understand, they're also on the childhood vaccine list now, which is pretty wild. If you get a vaccine on a childhood schedule, that is a gold mine, right? Because you have to do no marketing, and they're going into every kid's arm several times until they're between, just born and like 4 years old or so. So it's basically billions of dollars every year in your pocket. Should this be the dominoes falling? Yeah, it should. But is it going to be? Not a chance. I mean, something actually just popped up the other day. It was actually today that I forget his name. He goes under the name of Lifestyle Medicine Doctor. He was on Joe Rogan not too long ago.
Okay.
Today, Pfizer agreed to settle 10,000 lawsuits that were accusing the pharma giant of hiding cancer risks from the drug Zantac for heartburn. I've taken this before. 10,000 lawsuits they settled today that Pfizer did because of Zantac 75. Everybody knows that drug. So it's like, look, these pharmaceutical companies are very evil. They do not make money when you are doing well. They need you to be sick. That's their business. Their business is solving the problems that a lot of them are creating. So, I mean, at the end of the day, no, this isn't going to be them falling. They're going to continue. They have far too much influence, these companies. They own, like, what is it, 75% of the ad space in America right now, and it's one of only 2 countries in the world you can do advertising for pharmaceuticals, but they dominate the industry. And I think you mentioned this last time, and it's like, you don't bite the hand that feeds you. So all these organizations are now promoting all these pharmaceuticals too, like they're safe and effective. But look at all the harm they're causing. I don't know. For me, it's a tough one. I really have it out for the big pharma industry.
Yeah, there was actually a good whistleblower from Pfizer on Tucker Carlson about a month or two ago, I think, and he was he was saying that even the goal with the advertising on media, with them pumping 75% of the media's ad dollars into them, that he was saying the goal isn't to market the products, the goal is to financially capture the media industry and have them know that they can't now run pieces on these people because we would lose out on our funding.
I think it's both, right?
Yeah.
It's like, what a great way to double your money.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like I get you, I convince you that you need these things because when you see these commercials on TV, it's some dad that's running around with his kids in the sunshine. But then, like you said, now it's you completely corner them. No one can write a hit piece on you.
Yeah, hopefully. I mean, I think there is kind of this mass kind of awakening, so to say, about the current systems, or at least the reverting back to the understanding that these companies do not care about you. Right? It's hilarious to think that the company, obviously this is in regards to AstraZeneca, but it's funny to think about, say, a company like Pfizer, who has the largest criminal fine in American history for false advertising, is now all of a sudden like, yeah, is all of a sudden above and beyond promoting a ineffective and potentially dangerous product.
Well, it's also the problem we have is we've got a terrible system in place where the penalties don't actually fit the crime because it's basically a cost of doing business. They go, okay, well, how many people have heartburn? Oh, let's say it's 100 million. So if we sell Zantac, how many people are going to take this? Okay, so we stand to make, say, $10 billion. That's pretty good. Well, it's giving people cancer, though. Yeah, we know. But what do those lawsuits look like? Oh, we're going to lose like 2 or 3 billion. Cost of doing business. No problem. Let's go. Just roll them out. That's exactly what they do because the penalty structure is not severe enough. These people, people need to be, it's tough. I really agree with corporate structure and it not being able to, that it's a separate entity and it can't go to the person, because if you don't have that, people won't really start businesses. They won't take risks. They won't create opportunities. It won't happen. But God, when they're able to do things like this and this many people die, how is there no accountability for these individuals? It's really the dark side of corporate structure.
Yeah, that's one I've battled with for a long time, but I do think there has to be there, especially when it comes to loss of life.
Yeah.
Like they're like, to be able to hide behind corporate structure for that, or even to, you look at something like the financial crisis of 2008, when so many people in the banking system knew that everything they were doing with these terrible loans was creating the scenario where a house of cards was going to fall eventually. But yet again, one person went to jail out of that entire aspect. And so, like, to me, there definitely needs to be some sort of refining on that process as to opening individuals up in those areas for legal repercussions, for sure.
Yeah, I guess I find it discouraging, and I know this is expecting a lot, and it's very idealistic, but I just find it discouraging that I feel like a lot of these companies started out to do good, and then they became very, very evil because they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders to increase their bottom line. So it's like they create these problems, and they create and use these products that they know are harming people. They no longer do any good. Sure, if you have a headache and you need to take an aspirin, that works. But like the foundation of what a lot of these products are coming from now is not really doing anybody any favors. And it's frustrating. I wish we were at a point where, humans and corporations and people would actually do good, would actually care about your fellow human, because 1-to-1, unless you're an absolute psychopath, you have a hard time being brutally mean to someone or harming them because you're decent. Every human has decency inside them. Yet when we get behind these massive corporate structures, the evil knows no bounds. And I find it very, very discouraging.
Yeah, well, I think it's also because the evil people among us, the psychopaths, which ranges anywhere from roughly 1 to 10% at any given point. It's usually on the lower end of that. It's the kind of middle point of estimations is usually that it sits around 3% of society is like, has actual psychopathy. But the ones that don't get caught up in the prison system and all of that, the smart and capable ones are the ones that end up at the top of these power ladders, right?
Yeah.
That end up wielding these companies because they can get results when they don't care about the effects of their results. And so, yeah, it's definitely, it's a scary reality when you open yourself up to that idea that maybe some very less than ideal humans are in charge of some of the most powerful structures in our societies. But
yeah, so I mean, I guess at the end of the day, look, AstraZeneca falling in this respect and removing this product from the market, it's a win. And it's a win for a lot of people that feel like they needed vindication from maybe what happened through the pandemic. I'm not one of those people because I don't really care about that kind of stuff, but it is good to sort of maybe put them back in their place a little bit, just to remind people again, like, look, these people are not here to help you. Big Pharma is evil. They will continue doing evil shit, and you are just a number to them, and they do not care if you die, and they want you to be sick. So it's good when they have to sort of unschedule these things or pull them apart, or, they can't produce them anymore, because it does give people that kind of get caught up in the getting Pfizer tattoos through COVID. It's a little reminder. Hey, these people are not on your side.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to add today, brother?
That's everything.
All right, before we get out of here, don't forget to head over to our website, blendrnews.com. That's BLENDR news.com to sign up for our newsletter, which goes out 6 days a week, and we'll catch you next time.
Bye, everybody.